Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking and exploring two key events which occur at the end of July and the start of August. In fact, one of the events is absolutely critical, but the two events are not mutually exclusive. They are informing one another and in a very electric way. The first up is the North Node, which reversed into the sign of Taurus on the 18th of January this year. If you watch my year ahead forecast for 2022, which I recorded in the late summer of last year, I did forecast that we were going to have a financial reset. And that's really coming up to a boil. Now, in terms of Uranus, that moved into Taurus full-time from March the 9th, 2019. It did have a brief sojourn from mid-May to mid-November 2018. Now, if your Sun or any other inner planet is in the first 15 degrees of any of the four fixed signs, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio or Aquarius, this last couple of years has probably had quite a big impact in terms of making you feel restless. Now, of course, the North Node is our collective consciousness, and the sign of Taurus is what I need to really share with you, what the North Node here means. What does Uranus in the sign of Taurus mean? And what about Mars? How does Mars fare in Taurus? Because actually it's in traditional astrology is in its detriment, and Uranus, of course, is in its full. So we've got two potentially negative locations, two influences coming together in an exact conjunction at the end of July, the start of August. Now, if you would like to explore astrology and understand how these cycles impact on you, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place, I can give you a roadmap that can guide you for the rest of your life. If you've seen repetitive patterns in your situation, this can help you to understand them better and also to seize opportunities. But within my special package of 30% off, I also give you a 12-month personal forecast. These charts are totally individual to you. No two charts are the same. Please see the link below for more. And before I go into my full presentation, well, I'm also going to be sharing how this event will impact on each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces for the next 15 years. I'd be so grateful if you did subscribe to my channel. I've crashed through the 100,000 mark. I'm keen to get to 101 as quickly as possible. If you've already subscribed, thank you so much. But if not, please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. So thank you for joining me. First of all, I'm going to share on the screen the exact time this event occurs for you in your location. So first up, we have the North Node in conjunction with Uranus. And now I'm going to share exactly where the event occurs on Mars conjunct Uranus in your locality on the screen now. Now, in terms of the first event, obviously we have that very, very important connection between the North Node and Uranus, but it's also in a sextile to Venus in the sign of Cancer. Now, Venus in Cancer is essentially quite nurturing, and if we're thinking that the sign of Taurus can be about resources, I think what this is suggesting is the more we are careful with our resources, but potentially, particularly around our home, that can be a real cool thing to do. But also, the first event sees Mercury in an opposition with Saturn. So communications are going to be strident in the years ahead, and we're probably going to continue to see quite a lot of polarized opinions. But on the first event, the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon, which is, if you like, the yin-yang of this event, that's also opposite Saturn. So the reverse in Saturn in Aquarius, which is really influence us as a community, as the collective, because it's in the sign of Aquarius, is suggesting that there is going to be some increased tension. I think it's inevitable. Now, the second event also sees that lovely connection to Venus and also Mercury's opposition to Saturn. But this event also has the moon in an opposition to Neptune, and that's a very heightened sensory potential, but it also can cause a degree of confusion because the moon in Virgo is very much about precision and Neptune in Pisces is very much about mysticism. It's not really about the detail. So emotionally, I think these are two very powerful events, and they're very powerful in terms of communication. So let's just explore what the North Node means. So the North Node, as I say, is the collective. It's the outcome, the destiny of our past efforts, our past behaviour. Now, if we look at the opposite sign of the sign of Taurus, of course, it's Scorpio. So Scorpio is very much about intimacy. It's about where we're most invested. It can be about long-term finance. And of course, it can also be about sex. So one of the things I would say on this particular event is we are going to see some more scandals come into the open, probably to do with people in positions of great influence, such as politicians, where there's been sexual impropriety or things have been hushed up, covered over in some kind of way. But of course, the North Node can also be where we manifest success. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a negative sense. In Indian astrology, the nodes are seen much more in that way. Some people would argue the North Node can almost be like a mini Jupiterian event. It gives us an opportunity, and for sure it can, particularly if we work diligently. So if we balanced our books and kept a good relationship to how we consume things, then the North Node could provide a reward. But Uranus, of course, is, as I said before, in its full in the sign of Taurus. What does this mean? Well, the essential dignities of Uranus sees it domiciled in the sign of Aquarius. So that's where it gives its radical agenda for change, for open-mindedness, for being very progressive and innovative. The sign where it functions least positively is Leo, which is much more to do with conservatism. But it actually really thrives in the sign of Scorpio, very much to do with change, transformations, and of course intensity. But it's in its full in the sign of Taurus. So here it's not at its best. And if we think about Uranus, Uranus is very much about freedom, independence. It can be erratic, it can also be about change, and all those essential dignities you will have noticed are in fixed signs. So we have a bit of irony there. Uranus is about change, but in the sign of Taurus, it is the sign that is least open of all the 12 zodiac signs to any kind of change. So that's why there's been a lot of tension, I feel, building up for some while, particularly in that square with Uranus, which occurred last year, the start of this year, and is now beginning to be repeated within 3 degrees through to the end of the year. And I feel this will see COVID come back in quite a big way. And there are other diseases that are almost taking on a new life force because there has been some reluctance towards inoculation amongst some young people. But Uranus in Taurus, so we have the planet which is most radical, outspoken and erratic, competing with the most steadfast, stable energy of Taurus, and that's obviously creating a dichotomy between the two energies. Now, the other thing with Uranus in this location, of course, is that Taurus is the sign of the earth. It's also about the foundations of situations. It's also about nature. It can be about ecological issues, environmental issues. It doesn't matter how many plastic bottles we're recycling if we're still consuming too many products in them. And the earth is groaning under all this weight of expectation and consumerism that we're expecting of it. So I think Uranus is bringing truth to the reality of how the Earth is feeling our impact upon it. You know, whether it's ice melting in the Arctic poles, or we've got valleys in the Alps that are now showing a lot more grass than they ever have done before. The flooding, the intense sunshine, the fires, the amount of shock that goes on around tsunamis and earthquakes. All these events seem to be increasing, and increasing, you know, just in sheer rainfall, in a way that is hard for our existing infrastructure to deal with. And of course, Taurus is very much about infrastructure, because the sign of Aries is about where we're beginning the zodiacal journey, where we initiate. In the sign of Taurus, we're looking to get things firm. We're looking to really start to build the foundations of the home we want. The sign of Gemini is about how we socially interact. The sign of Cancer is how we start to have families and seek security, and so on. So Taurus is a primarily very important influence for security. It also governs food. And obviously we have a food crisis that's starting to gain extra emphasis because of the events in Ukraine. But we've had a food crisis for a long time because we have too much consumption in certain parts of the world and not enough distribution in other parts of the world. But all of this is reaching a real crescendo, partly because Uranus is going through its own Uranus return. So what this means is that Uranus goes through a cycle that lasts 84 years. The last time it was in the sign of Taurus was between 1934 and 1942. And that's when, of course, there was massive destruction through World War II. We also had the Spanish Revolution in that period of time. We also had Russia invading Finland. We had various pacts that fell apart. The whole issue of land very much sought after. And of course that's happening again now. And it's not just in the Ukraine. We have it in Palestine. We've had it in Syria. You know, we've had the Kurds pushed back in northern Iraq. We have Turkey wanting to impose more control over that region. So there's a lot of desire for land, a lot of desire for power, but also because the North Node can be the outcome of our past behaviours, all the consumerism that we've taken for granted, you know, things being readily available, we've not really been thinking about the process of how things are grown and then end up on our plates. And I think what Uranus is doing is trying to reveal the truth, strip back the layers, and that can be a very jarring sensation. And of course, the sign of Taurus is everyday finance. It's bills. So we've got some of those worldly resources, those essential resources such as gas, oil, precious metals, whether it is crops. All of these things are under huge pressure. Prices are being hiked and people are finding it incredibly difficult to deal with this change. Now, because Mars is in the mix, and of course that comes into the equation exactly on the 1st or the 2nd of August, again, depending on where you are, you bring a real thrust. But Mars is, of course, the ruling planet traditionally of the sign of Scorpio. So it, in traditional astrology, is straight out in detriment in the sign of Taurus. And if you think about it, Taurus is kind of patient. It sort of works towards things. It has that Venusian sensibilities. You know, it likes to feel comfortable. It likes to go at its own pace. But Mars is like a sense of urgency, it's desire, it's instant gratification. So if you put that alongside the very highly igniting and electric energies of Uranus and all this karma that we're reaping from past behaviours, you have a really turbulent mix. And that's where we get to at the end of this month. It really is quite incredibly powerful. Now, of course, Uranus is also about freedom and radicalism. So we do see very radical, polarized views, stubborn views, very fixed viewpoints, which people are finding hard to reconcile. We could also say Uranus is very much to do with the internet, because its link to technology along with Mercury is pretty clear. And really, since Uranus made its way into Taurus, the sign of everyday money, digital currencies have become much more popular. But we've also had a crash there. So there's been a big devaluation. Now, I know from the live readings that I have with people around the world that whether it's America, the UK or Europe, property prices have also gone up in a very extreme way. And COVID was feeding this, because obviously people wanted to work from home, therefore they needed more space. Also, people wanted a complete gear shift in where they lived in terms of their immediate ecological and environmental environment, if you pardon the pun. And that meant wanting to move somewhere that was peaceful, busier, by the sea, on a mountain, wherever it really suited them. So there's been a strong demand which has driven up prices. That's bound to be at the end of that peak. It cannot go on. And of course, interest rates are starting to go up because inflation has gone up. So Uranus is a very free radical influence. You put Uranus by Mars, this is, a highly turbulent combination. Now, one of the things it can do is make us make some quite quick decisions, because Mars can be quite impetuous and impatient, and Uranus could give us that much more daring. And in the sign of Taurus, if we do our research and we really are sure of the things that we discover, we do our due diligence, then we could make a very decisive move just when other people are backing off. So there will be some speculators that definitely do better, or there will be some people who are doing so well because they're exploiting the internet, which Uranus obviously governs, to monetize in some kind of new or unusual way. So there will be people who will be pioneers, because that's what Uranus is about. It's about seeing the future direction. But remember, in a sign that's a lot more risk averse. So important to really know what one's doing if one is going to be more speculative. But we are seeing also the issue of control around the internet. So there are some states trying to start their own sealed internet. There are others that kind of partially connect to the World Wide Web, but have lots of barriers to true openness. And then the other side of that, because of the polarity that's going on in people's viewpoints, in the Western world, we've got democracy almost eating itself alive, because the truth has got sacrificed on the altar of ideology. So what I would say about the relationship between the sign of Taurus and that is that Taurus can also be about self-worth. So people are identifying with their ideas in a very powerful way. But also, we're seeing who sees things in a different way, in a very stark way. So it's become very adversarial. And that's because of the polarity between the sign of Scorpio, which is about transformation, depth, thinking about things deeply. It can be about sex. And of course, it can be about long-term stocks, such as investments, pensions, savings, stuff to do with property. But it's this short-term stuff that's seeing a big reset that's developing. And I actually think that this is really, we're at the beginning of this, because I think the scarcity of commodities is going to get greater. We've also got, complex issues coming into the situation, like the amount of regulation that's in some countries, the lack of regulation in others. Some countries commit to some kind of monetary exchange system. Others like to work outside of it. And that also creates pressures. And then, of course, we've got the more clandestine side of the internet. So that's also something that Uranus can reveal. So we have quite a few wars going on in the world. whether we see what's going on in Ukraine as a proxy war between the West and Russia, or we see what's happening in Syria or Israel or wherever. The important thing to remember is that the impact of these situations is fed out through the internet. So the news cycle is very much tuning into our different values, our different approaches. So that's how I see it. And I'm going to share on the screen now the two chart wheels just briefly. The big one with the North Node Conjunct Uranus is that it does forge a really sweet sextile with Venus. In fact, the Mars conjunct Venus also has that lovely link with Venus. And of course, Venus is the ruler of Taurus, so there's some mutual receptivity there, which I quite like. And I think Venus is basically saying that if we can be protective about our home, if we can make the most of any land we've got, perhaps to grow some crops, or we can get some goods in our locality where possible, homegrown, if you can afford it, organics, that's a good thing to do with Taurus, because it is about getting grounded. But in the first event, in both events, we do have Mercury in an opposition to the retreating Saturn in Aquarius. Now, Saturn is the planet of restraint, of restriction, of limitation, but of boundaries, but also self-discipline. And in the sign of Aquarius, it therefore means in its retrograde that it's a restriction for us all collectively. And our personal freedom, Uranus, is being squeezed. And also our expectations around resources, consumption, money is being squeezed. So it's not just COVID that the square between Uranus and Saturn is going to be really provoking. I think we are going to see in its opposition with Mercury quite a lot of difficulties around travel and distribution. Now also the midpoint between the Sun and the Moon for that first chart is in the sign of Leo, and that's opposite Saturn as well. So our relationships, I think, are going to become tense. I don't think it's going to be as easy to freely fraternize and mix and mingle in the way that many of us have really enjoyed over the last few months, much more than we've been able to do for a couple of years. Now the second event, I'll be honest with you, the big standout there is the fact that the Moon is in an opposition with Neptune, and that can create an awful lot of distortion, a lot of fear, a lot of potential for misinformation, for our psychological welfare to be compromised. So I think also the Moon opposite Neptune does again point towards the potential for COVID, because if we look at the start of 2020, the midpoint that year between the Sun and the Moon was actually conjunct Neptune, and that was in Pisces. And of course, Neptune is a very nebulous, gassy, hard to define energy. It's shifting, it's evasive, very much like an infection or gases and stuff like that. So I think we are going to have a bit of a difficulty finding what the reality is in situations. But I think it's also important to understand the positive implications of where we are. So on the screen now, I'm sharing the simple chart wheel that we can all relate to for this event and where the planets are. So in terms of the North Node's conjunction to Uranus and that wonderful angle to Venus, that is essentially saying to us that we must, each one of us, really be very conscious as much as we can of trying to squeeze the most from our resources. And for some people it won't be a choice because finance is so tight. This is really serious stuff of choosing to eat or heat. Now fortunately this event is happening in the northern hemisphere in the summer, but that's not the case down south. So it's something that if we're lucky enough to have abundance around what we eat, we should be mindful of those who don't have the same privilege. And when wages have been stuck, there's been, very little pay increases for quite some time, but we've got this inflation, and borrowings become more expensive. So, whether it is fuel or it is our mortgages, less available cash. So therefore, if we can all make a conscious decision to use our resources in a more thrifty way, that is going to be giving something back to our fellow citizens. So that's one of the wonderful things we can think about with Uranus, that we can be innovative, that we can really take the whole issue of the environment and the ecology seriously. The second event, Mars conjunct Uranus, could, for some lucky people, bring about a rather speedy and rather galvanizing and exciting connection with someone, and it could have a real sexual dimension. Whether it will last very long is another matter, because obviously Mars has such a desire for excitement, and Uranus can be quite unstable with Mars in the sign of Taurus, where they're both really not at their best. So if someone comes into your life at a hurricane speed, you may enjoy the few moments that you spend with them, but if you're wanting something long lasting, it may be better to hold off, enjoy the excitement, but not get too up close and personal too quickly. Now, the other thing that could happen, of course, is that some people may want to break away more forcefully from something that they feel is limiting them. And here's one sort of pretty obvious, it's not a prediction, but it wouldn't really be a surprise. So it said that the Russian government, through Gazprom, are doing some repairs on Nord Stream 1 in Germany, and a part's coming from Canada, which the Ukrainians have had an issue with because it's against the embargoes, but it's possible that that won't be turned on, that supply won't be turned on. And you can imagine this, because if you think about it, Mars is about aggression, Uranus is about freedom. The North Node can be either side of the equation, feeling that they're giving the other side their due karma, and we all know that if things are turned up, it limits supply, which can drive up wholesale prices and makes what is available more valuable. So there are a lot of calculuses going on at the moment where the greatest political leverage can be inflicted, and of course the poor citizens or the people who are running factories that need that fuel are the least people are thinking about, because they know this is going to have a massive impact, just like restricting the gathering of crops and or the distribution of crops, and that's going to create immigration, and that also creates instability, which certain players in the world really want to achieve for their own nefarious aims. So that's where we are. I'm now going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. You can watch these in terms of your sun or your ascendant or both if they're different, but please stay with me, and this gives you a flavour of what you can expect over the next 15 years. So Aries, for you, I feel that there is the potential for some choppy conditions with your ruler Mars right in the pack, that side of you that likes to be quite impulsive, make instant decisions, listen to your gut instincts, which can be so sound. It's almost like that's going to be turned up like a huge dial, and that's going to give you so much more urgency. Now that could see you make some dramatic decisions at this stage, and it could be around a financial matter, but also it could be around a close relationship which you don't feel that you're really getting that much from. So your desire to liberate yourself could be very strong, but then there may need to be a division of the assets, which could be a painful process. Then again, it could be, if you're someone like me who has a real love of sugar, that the second house energy, which really draws us towards those calorific goodies, may need you to start thinking much more seriously about what you're ingesting, and right down to really making all your food from scratch if you don't already do so. So if you're someone who's got a real sort of preference for fast food, nothing wrong with the odd treat if it's become rather much the norm. I think this particular event is really going to ask you in quite a sudden and probing and pushing way to make some significant changes. I also feel with Aries people that you have a strong desire, and this has really been prompted by the transit of Pluto through the sign of Capricorn, to have a degree of autonomy. And I think what this event may show you is who holds the power where you need to collaborate or where you want to break free. You may have had the ascendancy, someone could push back, you may push back. There could be all these kind of resets, but expect some, very frank discussions, but also expect with that Moon Neptune opposition based on the Mars conjunction with Uranus on the 1st or 2nd, that could be very draining if you don't have a lot of clarity about what you're wanting to achieve. Now, just to let you know, Uranus will be moving into Gemini in 2025 temporarily, comes back into Taurus, and then goes into the sign of Gemini in 2026. And that's going to be a really exciting start of a journey for you, because life's really going to speed up in such an exciting way. And of course, by then Pluto will have moved into the sign of Aquarius in your 11th house of how you connect with people in a more networking way. So I think the next few years there is going to be a need for you to find ways to squeeze the assets and resources you have really as efficiently and as imaginatively as possible. And there may be some things that you have been very emotionally or physically or practically or financially invested in that are going to change for the better, or there may be some changes that may be more difficult, the Scorpio energy on the South Node, but change or staying as you are, I think just really is not an option. Now Taurus, ever since Pluto moved into your 9th house in 2008, you have slowly but surely been opening up to longer distance travel, higher education, different philosophies, a more freedom-loving lifestyle. But you've had to do that within the construct that you are a fixed sign and you do like that continuity, and it gives you a sense of security. But it was only really when Uranus burst into your sign for those 5 months in 2018, and especially if you're born right at the start of Taurus, that you really got the imperative, the impulse to move quicker with those changes. So where does that leave you now? Well, I think that this can be a brand new time for you of completely new and fresh beginnings. But one of the things I've noticed about my own life, but also working with clients, is that very often we can work towards something that was hugely important to us. But when we get to the summit of that attainment, before we actually raise the flag and wave at everyone in the distance, we're already thinking that actually I've moved on from that, or I've started to move on. I'm starting to set my sights towards something that's very different. And because of your real love of that continuity, I think that resisting change has been almost to a degree part of your nature. And of course, you love creature comforts and you love sort of everything to be very sensual and, and luscious, and, have your real sense of understanding of texture and, lovely fabrics and clothes or gorgeous food. Or you could be someone who really likes to live in a very simple, near to earth way, which is inspirational to us all at this time. But whatever type of Taurus you are, I really feel that you could be about to start something hugely exciting. But what I would say to you is that if you do head off in that new direction, it probably does require you at some level to let go of some of what you have now. And because you can be risk averse, that may not be a very comfortable progression. I don't mean in a technical astrological sense. So, but the desire to be more daring, to recreate who you are in some kind of dynamic, sparkling and thrilling way is going to be so strong. And I just think you're going to find it hard to resist. But of course, with the midpoint of Mercury in the part of your chart to do with where you live, in an opposition with the restrictive Saturn in terms of where you work, even if you decide to initiate something new, whether it's a relationship, a business idea, an interest, a hobby, a creative streak, a new location to live, a love affair, whatever you initiate, it is going to have reverberations across your life. Now, the problem is that you could analyze this to the point that you then decide to do absolutely nothing because it just feels more secure to stay with what you know. But if you really want to get the burst of adrenaline that this event offers you the chance to embrace, you may have to put that one step forwards into that new beginning and not analyze it too much, and actually listen more to your instincts rather than to the more practical considerations about money. But of course, money is going to inform what you do for sure, particularly with Saturn in your sector of how you connect with the wider world, and you need to be protective of yourself. But there's something about you at the moment which needs the thrill of the chase, the zing of something new and zesty and vibrant, and it will really bring such a sense of lift to you if you can go for it. But I obviously don't advise you to go for it without thinking very carefully about the consequences. But I think these energies are so irresistible. If you don't go for them, I think you're going to be fed up, thinking that you've kind of not really spun that wheel of fortune. And, you know, Pluto is coming to the end of its time in general in the ninth house. But of course, then it moves in 2023 just briefly into Aquarius, and then in 24 into Aquarius full of time in your 10th house of where you live and where you work, and where you connect with the world at large. So you may be putting off something that's almost inevitable. So what you can do with Mars and Uranus in the node is gather them to you and love them for the thrill they're giving you, and see if you can cling on to their rocket as they really burst you into a new beginning in the most exciting way. The choice is yours. So Gemini. Now, I've been saying to Gemini people for some while, because Pluto's been going through the 8th house, which is very psychological, it's also very much to do with how you earn money, very much to do with where you're very invested, can be to do with sex. If you're late in Gemini, you may have a quincunx going on with Pluto from your Sun, which can be a bit tricky. Of course, Venus and Mercury can often be very near the Sun, so could be in your sign, might be in Cancer, might be a bit before the Sun. However, what I'd say to you is that that Venus position has been really opening you up to a more psychological outlook. And having Uranus, the node, and Mars in your 12th house, I've got to be honest, it's not easy. And also your ruling planet Mercury is crunch tackled by Saturn. So your normal ability to flex and to articulate yourself in a very deft way, you know, you're very, very nimble and can pivot and see off challenges and stir a little bit of mischief and have a little bit of fun, but also with your wonderful wit. I think Mercury and that midpoint suggest that your philosophies, you know, your higher beliefs are becoming more and more important. Just going through the everyday thing, which you're so skilled at, is not really the only point. It's about what it means longer term for you. And that's going to become more apparent once Pluto comes into Aquarius in 2023, even if briefly. But this gathering of energy, of course, in terms of the overall zodiac, for you is in house 12. I've explained already in some videos for Geminis that Mars in the sign of Taurus is not easy for you, because it can stir up a lot of subconscious energies that you may have felt that you dealt with from the past hurts, angers, upsets. Of course, Uranus can be quite igniting and explosive in its conjunction with Mars. That's not easy. And you know, on the second event, we also have that opposition between the moon for you in the 4th house of home, and Pisces, and the Neptune in Pisces in your 10th house of work. So you could end up feeling quite confused. I think the best way to deal with this particular massive event is really submit yourself to it. And it's also about trying to not work through the issues that you're facing in only your inimitable intellectual way, you know, by making a joke, you know, just cracking some kind of one-liner to relieve a degree of tension, or saying, oh, I'm absolutely fine, you know, I'm just having a whatever. I feel because Uranus is going to be with you for some time before it moves into your sign fully in 2026, that you do need to understand that Uranus will keep working at you to help you to see the truth of your hidden side, the side you may be reluctant to look at. Or it could be that you've got great skill in that regard and it's drawing you into becoming much more attuned to astrology or psychology, and you want to help others, and it's others that you're going to channel that interest through. But a very psychological event, and I just feel that you will probably be feeling at the end of this month, July, and the start of August, and for some time to come, that your nervous system is a little bit overcooked. So doing all the things you can possibly do to keep the cortisol as low as possible, the early nights, trying to stay off digital technology a little bit, all the things that we know we should do that we don't do to try to create a greater sense of calm is going to be very important for you. There could also be someone from your past. I'm not going to say an old flame because I think it's a bit corny, to be honest, but someone could come back into your world. It may be a past colleague. It could be a past romantic attraction, but I think it's much more likely to be someone that you had a passion for, an admiration for. They could come back into your world, but they could come back simply through your recollections as much as in person. But that is possible for some Geminis. So Cancer, rather an exciting opportunity for you, I'd say. So why would that be? It's because the gathering of energy in the sign of Taurus is for you house 11, which is a very Aquarius feel. And of course, Uranus is the co-ruler of Aquarius. So Uranus for you gives you the opportunity to shake things up, to think about how you can pivot towards the type of future that you really want. This is not based only on more material considerations. It's based on doing things that really engage and interest you, or belonging to groups which share your philosophies. It can be an opportunity to bring new friendships into your world, but obviously with Mars and Uranus in the mix, there could be some that could make way. And it's all really down to you, because you can be quite conservative in your approach. And of course, this particular event does have Mercury and the midpoint in an opposition with Saturn. So as ever, money is going to be important to your thinking, and you can't be too idealistic only with this 11th house influence. You have to bring in the energy of the sign of Taurus, which is asking you to stay really realistic. But that's where you really have an advantage, because you're so good at managing your resources. So I think there's a sense of newness, of excitement, of fresh possibilities that can manifest for you on this event. But it may mean that some of the associations, some of the networks that used to be so important to you could break down. And so therefore there is a transitional period, which understandably could be rather unsettling. Now for you, Leo, this cluster of energy is high in the sky in your 10th house, or midheaven. So this is very much about how you connect with the wider world. Are there talents? Are there skills? Are there resources that you've been I wouldn't say timid about displaying, but perhaps not showing enough self-belief to really embrace and to share and raise your profile in an exciting and dramatic way. Because a new job, a new position, a new opportunity to gain authority, to be more confident, and in the way that's the best of your sign. The issue with the sun alone is it does depend on each person's natal horoscope, so which house it's in. So you could have a Leo person with their sun in house 12, and the ascendant may be in Virgo, which would give you a kind of different energy to someone who may have the sun in Leo but in house 5, which would give you extra dynamism and an ability to radiate your energy to the maximum. So it depends on exactly what type of person you are deeper within the mode of your sign. But this event could see you thinking again in a big way about your work. It may mean that you're going to break away from something that's been very reliable for you. Not easy, because the 10th house in Taurus is where you do like those creature comforts. You can also be very generous to those who are less fortunate. And without those worldly supports, it's difficult to do that kind of stuff. But I think what Uranus is really asking you to do, along with the node, is to really embrace your passions, the authentic part of yourself, because that is what Uranus is about, being true to ourselves. And Mars just gives you more feist, more fire to try and reach more people with the qualities you have. So if you're someone who is a little bit reluctant to seek out the limelight, this could be rather challenging to you. If you'd rather stay with a job even though it doesn't really excite you, then this could cause some stress and frustration and be very unsettling. It just depends how you buy into the event. But if you really want to manifest something about yourself, which is really exciting, dynamic, interesting, playful, artistic, a wonderful opportunity to do it at this time. You just need to be very clear in your personal expression, with Mercury in your sign and the midpoint both opposite Saturn. So the way you get your point of view across is going to be important. It's also the case that for some Leo people, a partner may not be particularly happy if you want to do something that's really radical and fresh. They may prefer you to stick with the tried and trusted, and that could create some tension. Now Virgo, for you, this sense of excitement has been developing since 2018, when Uranus first went into your 9th house. It then rotated back into your 8th, back into the 9th in March 2019, been there ever since. So a lot of Virgo people have had a desire to travel more, to expand their knowledge, to perhaps learn more about technology, which Uranus obviously hugely influences, along with your ruler, which Mercury is very much to do with the detail and the precision of technology. And I think if you're in a situation where you feel rather caged up, and the truth of your situation is something that you might have been a little bit reluctant to embrace, I think the next few weeks, even potentially years, are going to be a time of interest, because Mars is pushing you to really be much more spontaneous, much more in the moment, much more independent, to break free of anything which is stopping you really achieving a sense of independence, freedom, and being in touch with the things that really excite you. But you can do those things in a partnership if the partnership is right, because we can allow one another space. But if you're in a partnership where you feel that the person's too clingy, you can't breathe, they don't share your passion for more vigorous exercise or exciting topics, then that is going to inform your situation. Of course, because COVID restrictions could come in, and because your ruler Mercury is compromised by Saturn on this event, I think your desire for a change or to be, more spontaneous, it could in some ways be limited by those circumstances beyond your control. But there also may be an inner part of you that in a subtle way could feel a little bit tentative, maybe a little bit of self-doubt just washing around, or maybe a sense of duty towards the things you feel you should be doing. But the conflict between house 6, where Saturn is for you, and this pack of energy in house 9 is to try to do the right thing, but also embrace what you need to do for you. It's not about being entirely for you or entirely too giving. That's not good either. So it's about finding a balance between houses 6 and 9. Which brings us to Libra. Now, Libra, for you, this event occurs in the 8th house. The 8th house is in itself very scorpionic, and of course the South Node's in Scorpio. The 8th house is where we're really deeply invested, but Mars and Uranus in the 8th house could see some big action around your love life. It could see you drawn towards someone who really makes your pulse race quickly, someone who's got a magnificent sort of aura, a sort of intensity about them that really can draw you in. Or you could suddenly want to break away from something that really doesn't work for you at all, and you could do so in a very dramatic fashion, because your sign is a cardinal sign and you give the impression of being able to very skillfully work relationships and work with people, which you can, of course, but sometimes it can feel that you don't get what you need back within the equation. When Mars and Uranus together in the 8th house, whether it's money, whether it's a possession, or whether it's sex, you could find yourself being much more direct in your approach. Or if there's a lack of those things in your situation, articulating your need for them in a much more honest and frank and very direct way. That scorpionic energy doesn't take prisoners. It's really to the point. And of course, because Mercury is in opposition with Saturn and the midpoint, maybe it isn't necessarily just about relationships. Maybe it's more about trying to balance where you're trying to be your most self-expressive with how that connects to others. But if you feel it's a case of diminishing return in terms of your creative input to what you get back financially, or in terms of people's respect, or you don't feel someone's as committed as you, these are very, very highly charged influences. If you're single, you may love this quite a lot. It could sort of break you out of that part of your nature that can sort of be quite caught up in how things seem. I don't mean superficially, but more the appearance of things. And this gives you an earnestness, a yearning for something that's deep and fascinating and perhaps a bit edgy. And that can all come to pass in the weeks to come. Now, Scorpio, of course, your ruling planet Mars, traditional ruler, combining with the North Node and Uranus. For you, this can be problematic for relationships, I'll be honest. And with Mercury high in the sky opposite Saturn, midpoint opposite Saturn, Saturn in a retrograde in your sector of emotion, your impatience around a property, home, family matter could really be counterproductive. And you could push something so hard that you actually break it to your own detriment. So very, very important to understand the issue of boundaries, the issue of why you may feel so earnest at the moment, why a sense of urgency about what you're getting in your interactions with others. It could be where you need to compete. It could be where you're negotiating, but it could be where you're relating in a more personal context. And very important that you don't try to dominate the relating only on your terms. So just be conscious of that, whether it's your sun or your ascendant. But if you're wanting to, to step up your interaction with others, test yourself out, be more sporting, whether it's even doing your own physical exercise and really pushing yourself to a greater degree to see how much you can build your endurance up, then this could be very, very good. Or it could see you, even if you're quite a shy Scorpio, being much more on the front foot about reaching out for what you want around your closest relationships. Which brings us to Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, Uranus has been stirring up your world of work, of service, obligation and health since 2018, full-time since early 2019. And there's probably been a lot of change, but you probably also suffer quite a lot of nervous tension. Can be quite a lot of nervous tension on this event, if I'm honest. If you're one of those Sagittarius people, that I think this has changed with you somewhat in recent years because of the impact of Neptune in your 4th house. But Sagittarius people, this huge appetite for life, but this lust to move on quickly from disappointments has meant that you may have accumulated bits and pieces of dissatisfaction or unhappiness, and this could be having an impact on your well-being, your energy, your drive, or even your temper. Little things could be really irritating you at this time. I think it's important to keep seeing the big picture, which you have a gift for, but accept at the moment you do need to work on the details. I know that sounds like a paradox, but if you can get that in balance, that will be very helpful. But with the moon in opposition with Neptune on the exact conjunction between Mars and Uranus, I think that one is going to be potentially more confusing about what you want. So I think an ability to have the patience to grapple with the minutiae, something that, I think some archers really can find tiresome, because you could have a stack of planets in Capricorn, you could have a load of 6th house, and that may all come very naturally to you. But if you're a more free range type of Sagittarius, loves to travel, loves to do your own thing, Neptune has been making you think a lot about home, family and emotion since 2012. But this event really is saying that if you're so focused on practicalities but so out of sync with your inner world, that can be an issue. Or if you're finding it difficult to find the exact role that you want, or you're doing a job that's very unsatisfying and doesn't really, it's not something that you feel is contributing much, that could create a lot of frustration. So I think on the whole that you could be on a slight short fuse with this event, and things that you would normally just shrug off could actually get under your skin a little bit. So just be conscious of that potential. If you're traveling with Mercury in that opposition with Saturn, that is something that could be a snag to your plan. So very important in the coming weeks to really micromanage those things, whilst being really excited about some of the unusual places that you may hope to check out. Brings us to Capricorn. For you, this big event occurs in your sector of risk, of speculation, of self-expression, of children, of love and romance. If none of those above you can tick with relish, then your life may be rather mired in practicalities. And it's important not to let them pulverize our passion. So really this set of influences is very much about pushing you to be a lot more edgy. You can be very conservative, hard-working, you take responsibilities enormously seriously, you're a great manager of resources generally. Yes, you like your treats, of course you do. And of course Mars is exalted in your sign, it likes being in Capricorn. But on this particular event, I think it's saying to you, if you're thinking about doing something that's more edgy and chancy, and it does involve capital, because that's what Taurus can be about, you really need to know what you're getting yourself into. And that's where your very patient and persistent way of checking through details and scrutinizing the ups and downs, the checks and balances, is something that can hold you in good stead. But if you feel that your love life is like an episode from Frozen, this is a wonderful chance to really be much more daring in who you try to connect to. And it may see you have some real trepidation. But if you do something, even if it doesn't turn out to be anything that's particularly long lasting, the thrill, the buzz, the up you could get from just pushing yourself could be absolutely fantastic. Which brings us to Aquarius, which of course is my sign. So Uranus has really been making us water bearers rather restless around family, emotional and home-based issues ever since 2018, because if you remember that year, Mars was parked up just at the start of Aquarius for a period in a square with Uranus, and that caused real potential for upset, because Mars in the first house, very impulsive, Uranus in the fourth, a lot of revved up tension, and the truth of Uranus may have seen you really telling it as it is to certain people closely around you, and it may have been very hostile. The whole atmosphere may have been hot and not very easy. So we're kind of getting a repeat of that this time, but obviously Mars this time is conjoining Uranus. So what to say? Well, if you need to be dynamic and need to make some very smart, quick and decisive decisions about where to live and how to live there or who with, the chances are you can do so. The problem with Mars in the fourth house is that Mars in the sign of Cancer, which is very fourth house, is in its full. It doesn't like being there. It can make Cancer people who have Mars there very defensive. I mean, Cancer people need to be protective as well as nurturing. So it's not bad to have a little bit of a nip coming out from those pincers. But this fourth house energy is very much about how you, the environment that you live in, how comfortable you feel with it. But the inner restlessness that may have been affecting your sleep as much as it has been mine is likely to be a particular issue. Of course, Mercury and the midpoint in the seventh house is about relationships. So if you have relationships where it seems that other people are always surprising you and making demands and not taking account of your needs, then that can be very tiresome. This could be particularly the case around a property matter. Then again, maybe you've been very changeable about your objectives in this area, and people may wonder when you're ever going to settle down. Well, I think you can. You're just looking for what most Aquarius people need, which is space, an occasional need for complete peace and quiet, an occasional need for amazing amounts of stimulation. And, you know, obviously Uranus can make Aquarius people a bit variable in their objectives, but that's also what can make us interesting, that we're not necessarily just proceeding in a straight line. Also, another thing that could happen now is greater truth could emerge around an emotional or family matter that's caused you some real pain in the past. And as that information comes out into the open, it may come through you, it may be somebody else who shares about it. It may actually be very good for you, even if initially it coming out into the open, you know, can challenge that side of you that may want to keep a sense of privacy. But in general, I think there could be some healing around an emotional issue, but I think on balance, this is probably going to be more of an unsettling time around where you live. So even if you really love it and you love your family or flatmates or partner, it's going to be important to have a little bit of space. And, you know, also where possible, try to burn off a little bit of the surplus energy and try not to get frustrated if other people don't see things as quickly as you do, because that is definitely a possibility. Which brings us to Pisces. So for you, this pack of energy occurs in house 3. Very exciting, because that's about digital technology, neighbours, community, everyday communications, text messages, emails, quick, very Gemini, very quick moving and great fun. And if you get Mars there, it could see you wanting to be more physically active. Things like cycling might surprise you. If you're someone who's not particularly into cycling, but you've got a bike gathering dust in the garage, you may want to get it out and give it a bit of a whirl, because Mars in the third house can give us a desire for more quick, explosive energy. If that's not your thing, it could be going for a swim, doing aerobics, doing some dance routines. Uranus also very, very restless. Your nervous system could be really overstimulated. There could be a lot of activity or discussion with siblings. However, with the midpoint and Mercury in your 6th house, angling up to Saturn in the 12th, something to do with work or your service to others. Maybe you're feeling quite run down and oppressed by the everyday slog. And I think that this aspect, this gathering of energy, is saying it's very, very important that you do find an outlet for your frustration, that you do try to find a way to tune out. I find it difficult, to be honest, because we have all this technology and blah, blah, blah. I'm answering stuff late at night. It's not good for us. So be particularly aware of that at this time and try to find ways to, have that mental stimulation, which is so important, but also have some time perhaps away from your device, away from the screen, just really getting in touch with that side of your nature which loves stillness, which loves to daydream, which loves to just go into your own dimension in a way which can be spiritual, it can be detached, it can be by engaging in hobbies or having a drink with friends and just having a bit of escapism. Those things could be very important. But the second influence has that Moon Virgo opposition with Neptune in your sign. So that does point towards the potential for quite a lot of intense discussion with someone that you relate well to, but you could find it a little bit hard to get their exact point of view. They may seem to be sort of not necessarily evasive, but not really wanting to quite give you what you want, but for no obvious reasons, or they're finding it hard to say how they feel. Perhaps you're finding it hard to say how you feel. If you're signing any documents at this time, particularly if it's to do with health matters, not necessarily just for yourself, make sure that you don't rush any kind of application form, or if you're thinking of buying some new technology, which you may definitely think of at the moment, important to not be too impulsive, to slow things down, go through your due diligence in a step-by-step way. It's been wonderful to share this with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Stay safe and goodbye for now.